Both the speeder and the slow driver are both breaking the law. The same human construct called the law that I referenced earlier. This is not a speeders versus slow drivers argument. It's really there's this group of people who break the law and argue with each other about it, about who's breaking it the right way, and then there's everybody else. That's really the distinction. Hey, welcome to the video. In this video, I'm actually going to be discussing driving behaviors. I just finished looking at the Texas DPS website, and they have a list of common traffic violations found on driving records in Texas. And so I live in Texas right now. I'm here visiting for a few months. I used to live here for 5 years. I'm going to be talking about the topic of speeding today, which is a big thing for Texas. I have some stuff that the website mentioned as well. I'm going to be essentially making the point that driving is a free-for-all. Not that it should be a free-for-all, but we're at current human consciousness, it is a free-for-all. I think if you are a driver, then you know what I'm talking about. The road is an interesting place. It's actually a great example of human behavior in general, so maybe I can make that point. I'm also going to be discussing the time I spoke to a cop about speeding and about speed limits. I was shopping at PetSmart. He was buying dog food. I was picking up cat food. And I just stopped for a few seconds to talk to him. And I'm going to give you that police officer's perspective because I found it very interesting coming from a cop. And it's actually going to help me tie my story together, which essentially my point that I'll be making is that everyone has their own kind of driving in their head. Everybody has their own rules. And that's why we see this is why even something like speeding can exist in the first place. So let me read this first. So first of all, Texas, this is from the Texas DPS website. This is what they say. Texas ranks as the 7th most dangerous state for drivers. Now, I actually find this kind of hilarious because I've also found, I think there's some YouTube channels as well where people have mentioned that, Texas drivers, like, what was their claim? They said something like they're fast but safe or something like that. That's obviously not the case. As Texas, just from the records, this isn't even including the people they didn't catch, obviously, which I'll be discussing, obviously, because every day we all see people that don't get caught doing things. So I'm going to quote something else, and then I'm going to get into my analysis of speeding, and I'll be talking a little bit about driving briefly in other states. Now, and I quote, this is from Texas DPS, and I quote, "While Texas allows its drivers to go up to 85 miles an hour on several highways, which is a higher speed than in other states, speeding remains a concern. According to the Texas Department of Transportation, speeding was a contributing factor to accidents that resulted in 1,522 fatalities in 2021. Now, I want to discuss real quick some common objections I hear from, obviously, the only people who would object to this are speeders, which makes sense. Okay, so here's some things I hear. They might say, well, I have a fast car. My Mustang is faster than your Civic, or my Camaro is faster than your Camry, or whatever the case. So if you go online, you can kind of discuss speed limits and whatnot with people that choose to speed. This is one of the objections that they'll say. The problem with this type of objection, one, it's a low consciousness objection. It implies that because your vehicle is faster, that you should drive over the speed limit. So essentially, and I want to point out something here too, and my goal in this video is going to be to increase the consciousness of drivers and see if I can make some kind of impact that will hopefully echo throughout the cosmos and decrease death on the road, I suppose. And there's lots of facets of death on the road. I'm going to be picking on other sections of traffic violations in future videos, but today I'm going to do speeding, and I'm also going to do the inverse of speeding, slow drivers. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So they say that the problem here obviously is that your fast car is not a counter or a justification for breaking the law, which, yes, you are breaking the law by speeding. Now, the reason I wanted to point this out was I hear a lot of people talk about, like with like the racial issues, and we see things. For example, during the George Floyd, right after George Floyd died, I heard a lot of people talking about there was a lot of black versus white stuff going on, which I found interesting to hear people say. It's like, oh, well, black people do this many more crimes and these types of things. It's like, okay, well, yeah, we have data on these types of things. And that's fine. That's fine that we have data on that. But we have to be careful about pointing out just certain little pieces of information and cherry picking. Because the fact of the matter is, yes, so when a person does a crime and they're black, they broke the law, but they broke it regardless of being black. So in the same sense, the possession of a fast car does not transcend the law. You still broke the law. Here's another objection that we hear. The speed limits are outdated. Okay. Well, this is another example of it being besides the point. So even if it is outdated, it's still the case. I just find this one to be kind of fascinating. When something is outdated, it doesn't then grant permission to break that law anyway. The reasoning and justifications for this particular objection are usually along the lines that vehicles are safer. One of the issues with, I guess to say a separate issue of this, is simply that, yeah, the vehicles themselves may have more safety features, advanced airbags, etc. But human beings generally aren't any better. We're not that much better now than we were then. Sure, we've gotten better, right? We always tend to trend. We typically trend upward in any kind of activity that we engage in over a long period of time. Another objection I hear is slow drivers cause more accidents. So this is obviously an example of placing the blame somewhere else so that we don't have to address the speeding part. And I'm going to get to the slow drivers here in a second. But here's the point. I'm going to make my transition right now. Both the speeder and the slow driver are both breaking the law. The same human construct called the law that I referenced earlier. This is not a speeders versus slow drivers argument. It's really there's this group of people who break the law and argue with each other about it, about who's breaking it the right way, and then there's everybody else. That's really the distinction that should be made here if we're gonna make distinctions. So what's actually happening is the slow drivers. So let's use an example, 65 miles an hour on the highway. An old lady hops onto the highway and she's going 45 miles an hour. She's slowing traffic down. She's creating potential traffic jams and accidents in the future that she doesn't know she's causing because she's unconscious of the fact that her slow driving is causing that. The speeder is either unconscious of the fact that the speeding also increases the tension of the road because people need to adjust to so let's say the speeder and the old lady both get onto the road on different ramps at the same time. Well, now there's a driver going 65 miles an hour who's stuck behind the old lady who's going 45, and so they need to make a lane change, and so they do that, but then they can barely actually do that going the legal speed limit because here comes the Dodge Ram going 90 miles an hour on the other side. And so you can see here how there's a driver that's kind of subject to the other two's perspectives. There's only one driver in this instance that's actually doing the quote unquote what they're supposed to be doing. And there's two that have decided to make their own rules, and they've gotten onto the highway. They've actually created a more dangerous situation for all three of them. This brings me to my conversation with the police officer that I saw at the pet store. So I went up, I talked to him, and I asked him about speeding. When would he pull somebody over? When would he not? And he answered this way. He said, he spoke of himself not as a police officer, but just as a driver off duty. He said, well, what I normally do is I set my cruise control to 6 miles an hour over the limit, but nobody bothers me. So he was obviously speaking of himself in the third person, being a citizen and not as a police officer himself. I found this interesting because as a police officer, obviously a police officer would know, like, okay, so if it's 45 miles an hour, the speed limit is 45 miles an hour. I can definitely understand a police officer that wouldn't pull somebody over for 1 or 2 below or above the speed limit for obvious reasons. But the fact that he's like, oh yeah, I just put it 6 over, so I'm going to go 51 miles an hour, and they don't bother me. This is actually very important. This is a perfect example of a human engaging in self-deception, engaging in self-justification for the action they're doing. So what the police officer is saying is, since I don't get pulled over, it's okay. This is actually a separate category than the law. So like I said, the point of me making this speeding video was, one, to point out some of the data and some of the facts, but also to increase your consciousness. So I'm hoping that if you are a speeder, if you are the old lady that gets onto the highway going 20 miles under the limit, and even for the drivers that drive the speed limit and you're frustrated and you're trying to navigate the roads better, but they seem to progressively getting worse, I'm hoping this is like increasing the consciousness of the activity on the road. And I'm hoping that the next time you go drive that you'll remain conscious of this, and that this will actually hopefully reduce some of your frustration. Because if you're the speeder and you're going 90 and a 75, then you're going to be very upset. You're actually, so a lot of the speeders don't understand that they're not only upset at the old lady that's going 20 below. You guys are actually upset also at the people going the actual speed limit. That you need to work through whatever is underneath the feelings, right? If you know anything about subconscious reprogramming, there's a reason you get the frustrated feeling around a person actually going the legal speed limit. And I suggest you go do your own therapy or whatever to figure out what's going on under there so that you can control your road rage, which is obviously a big issue that we also have. If you're the old lady, hopefully this helps you consider the consequences of you driving 20 miles under the speed limit. For the most part, if you're not willing to, and here's my take. If you're not willing to drive what the speed limit actually says, then you can either not complain or you can not get on the road. And that goes for the speeders and for the slow drivers. I also want you to watch very closely as the subconscious mind starts to generate excuses, no matter which camp you're in. If you're the slow driver, the speeder, the speed limit driver, you're going to come up with different excuses and objections to what I'm saying. But keep in mind, I'm only talking about like the core of this. The core of this is like, okay, so the law was like, here's the speed limit, it's 60 miles an hour. Watch as your mind tries to create new justifications. It's gonna say different things like, well, F you, and sometimes it'll create objections like that which don't actually have any content. It's just a display of frustration. It just means that I have, if you do, like, this is essentially what effective therapy, in my opinion, is trying to do. It's actually trying to pull that thing out that has objections to things that are true, that are presented, so that you can understand it. So watch as your mind tries to like get around that. It's thinking of a comment to write that debunks me, right? That's what debunking is. So if you're watching this video, you probably like to watch YouTube. Humans like drama, so we love to watch people debunk each other. And that's the reason. It's actually the same core reason. We like to find things that justify the actions that we do, and we don't like to find things that go against the justification. They go against what we prefer to do. Real quick, I want to touch on raising the speed limit. So throughout my life, I've driven in Illinois, Iowa, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado. I don't know if I said that. And there's a noticeable difference of drivers in Texas. But overall, I wanted to talk on speed limits raising in any state. So earlier I mentioned that, one of the common arguments is speed limits are outdated. So we actually see speed limits increasing a little bit, at least over the past 10 years. I want to point out another trick that the human mind plays on you. So whenever, let's say the speed limit's 65, What speeders do is they'll go 70, 75 miles an hour. But if the state or the government or the federal government or whatever raises the speed limit to 75, well, then those same speeders just go 90. I encourage you to take a close look at that too. Like, in what situations, especially with speeding, are you overextending? Do you look at a 55 and say, "Oh, I can comfortably go 60," kind of like how that police officer decided to do, right? So you can see, like, the police officer is actually a great example. He's like, "Oh yeah, I just said it's 6 over whatever it says." So he's actually looking at it, and then he literally creates his own speed limit in his head, which then makes the entire road incongruent. So if you guys out there that are resonating with what I'm talking about, I would love to continue this discussion. Keep an eye out for my future videos. I'm going to be discussing some other areas of driving. I'm going to talk a little bit about insurance and driving without insurance. Maybe the next video. I'm going to talk about stop signs, which I see a lot of issues there. I've been really trying to get to that one. Texting while driving, driving drunk, and things like that. So that's it. That's all I got in this video. Appreciate it. Leave a like, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next video.